Hey guys, how's it going? Danconia. Welcome back to the Overwatch League Roundup 2020 Playoffs Week 2 preview. So, last week was an absolute cracker in terms of the Overwatch League playoffs kicking off for 2020, and this week we will round them out. Last week we knocked out 10 teams. We are left with the Atlanta Reign, Florida Mayhem, Washington Justice, Los Angeles Valiant, New York Excelsior, Guangzhou Charge, Seoul Dynasty, Shanghai Dragons, San Francisco Shock, and Philadelphia Fusion to fight it out for 2 spots in NA and 2 spots in North America, in APAC I should say, to go through to the grand finals for this year's league playoffs, and it's going to be an interesting one. So, we start off on Friday, September the 11th at 8 PM with the Atlanta Reign taking on the Florida Mayhem. This is us starting in the North American losers bracket. And Atlanta Reign previously losing to the San Francisco Shock 3-1 after knocking the Paris Eternal down to the losers bracket, where they eventually lost to the Washington Justice. Florida Mayhem, they got knocked down to the losers bracket by the Los Angeles Valiant, their bogey team, and then proceeded to knock out the LA rivals, the Gladiators, in fairly convincing fashion. So, Atlanta Reign taking on Mayhem is an interesting one, but I think the Florida Mayhem should have enough to see the Atlanta Reign off. I think the Atlanta Reign have looked okay, but I think their coordination has also looked a little bit off at times with Erster blocking shatters from Gator and people like that. So, I think sometimes the coordination can be a little bit off for the Reign. I think the Florida Mayhem have a higher skill ceiling as well. With BQB on long-range hit scan or short-range hit scan, we know he's very good. We know Yaki can turn up at times as well, and I think the tank line is fairly consistent for the Florida Mayhem. And we know that Gangnam Jin is very good on that main support and that flex support, and Chris is pulling his weight as well. So I think the Florida Mayhem should have enough to see past the Atlanta Reign. I would say 3-1. But in the next losers bracket match, we have the Washington Justice taking on the Los Angeles Valiant. Washington Justice have been on an absolute tear-up. They've been the surprise of these grand finals, beating the Vancouver Titans 3-0, then the Dallas Fuel 3-0. They lost to the San Francisco Shock narrowly 3-2 in a match they could have won, but then proceeded to sweep the Paris Eternal and dumped them out as well. So they've only dropped 2 maps this entire playoffs against a very good team in the San Francisco Shock. The Valiant, they came down to this bracket because of a nasty game against the Philadelphia Fusion where they got fairly heftily beaten, but they did manage to beat the Florida Mayhem in the round previous to that. So, the question is, how does this work out? And I think it's all in terms of whether the Valiant can shut down Decay. It's most likely that the Justice will be telegraphing this Decay Zarya, this Jano Roadhog. They love this style of play. It's working for them very, very, very well. And I don't expect them to change it. So it would be very surprising if they would do, and therefore the Valiant should know what they're letting themselves in for here. Do I think the Valiant will come out on top? I'm not entirely sure. If Decay is allowed to run wild in that Zarya, I think it could be a pretty convincing win for the Washington Justice. And so I'm going to go for a 3-1 to the Washington Justice. And I thought I'd never be saying that, especially before last week. But I think Justice are very, very powerful in this meta. And I'm not sure whether the Valiant have got quite the quality or the flexibility to counter them to the extent that San Francisco Shock did to get that narrow victory. I don't think the Valiant are quite there. So I think the Justice get past them in this one. But then we move over on the Saturday to the Saturday morning in BST at 10 AM, and we move to APAC, and we see in the losers bracket the New York Excelsior taking on the Guangzhou Charge. So the New York Excelsior lost 3-1 to the Shanghai Dragons. Guangzhou Charge got a hefty beating by the Seoul Dynasty 3-0. I don't see this going any other way but a win for New York Excelsior. The reason I say this is because Guangzhou Charge didn't look like a second seed team against the Seoul Dynasty. To be quite honest, they didn't look like a team that could beat the Hangzhou Spark, who are already out of this competition, or the Chengdu Hunters. They didn't look competent in this meta. Excelsior, they looked decent against the Shanghai Dragons, but the Shanghai Dragons are that step above them, and so the Shanghai Dragons came out on top. I think this could be a fairly convincing victory for the Excelsior, but we do have to take into account that the Excelsior are known to choke in certain situations, so I think this could be closer to call than perhaps it should be for the Excelsior. So I would go for a 3-2 victory for New York. I don't think they're going to lose to this Guangzhou Charge side. I'd be very surprised if they did. Guangzhou Charge, if they make some changes, I think they were too hasty to put Nero in. I think they perhaps should have stuck to Eileen and Happy, and something that has basically done very, very well for this entire season so far, while Nero has had visa issues. So I think it would be better if Guangzhou Charge went back to that, but again, they may not be able to. So I still think Excelsior are going to win here, but I'll go for 3-2 because I think Excelsior will drop maps somehow. Then we see the winners bracket final in the APAC region. This is at 12 PM. This is the Seoul Dynasty taking on the Shanghai Dragons. This will be incredible. This will be a heck of a match, because in a situation like this, when we last saw this match, it was the May Melee final, and that went 4-3 to the Shanghai Dragons. This is going to be super interesting, because this is two teams that I think could clash quite a lot on different metas. Last week against the New York Excelsior, we saw the Shanghai Dragons very much stay in the ballpark of the Fearless Winston and the Void Diva. However, the Seoul Dynasty, not afraid to run that Roadhog. Gesture has looked very, very, very good on that Roadhog. And so if these two metas clash, I think we could see a very interesting game. And this, I think, could in fact be more interesting than the NA final. The winners bracket final anyway. So this is very hard to call, because Seoul Dynasty have a very good knack of turning up in these situations, in the tournament high pressure situations. They also have a lot of experience. Shanghai Dragons, they are very consistent and they are very clutch. So I think we are looking in this match at the two teams at the top of APAC right now. I don't think anyone else can compete with them. In terms of which way it will go, it is difficult. I would have to back the Shanghai Dragons 3-2. I think it will be very close. But Shanghai, I just feel like they have another level of team synergy and stuff like that, where even if they're going into a hog sort of setup, I think they can make the dive work. I think we'll see Lip on the Sombra. I think may see Fleta Tracer or the Ash. And I think Shanghai will make this work. I really, really do. So I'm going to back them with a 3-2 victory, which would send them, obviously, straight to the Grand Finals. But talking about winners games, or winners brackets finals, that's what I'm trying to say. At 8 PM on the Saturday, we see the San Francisco Shock taking on the Philadelphia Fusion 1 and 2 in North America. So this, I think, won't be as close as the APAC winners bracket final, because I honestly think Philadelphia Fusion are better than the Shock, and I think there's a little bit between them. I think Philadelphia Fusion, in terms of player by player, they have a much higher skill ceiling than the Shock right now. I think the Shock need the Shock will need to be at the triple, quadruple A of their game to beat the Fusion. But I think the Fusion will really want to win here. They will really set out to win this. And again, I go back to the thing that we mentioned in the Seoul Shanghai preview, and that is the fact that Philadelphia Fusion last week dive, and it was beautiful. Great aggression. It was perfect from the Philadelphia Fusion. San Francisco Shock, not so stuck on the dive. We did see a bit of Super Hog and things like that. So it could go again that way, where we see two different metas clash. The thing is, that proof is in the pudding for the Philadelphia Fusion here. When we were talking about Shanghai taking on New York, it was a mirror matchup. Philadelphia have gone up against teams with Hog and played the dive into it and won. I believe it was the Gladiators or the Valiant, one or the other. Of course it was, because that's who they played last week, but I think it was the Gladiators, where they ran into it with the dive and did perfectly fine. And so I wonder whether Shock have it in their back pockets to stop the Fusion, and I don't think they do. I think this will be a 3-1 for the Fusion. I don't, however, think the Shock will get swept. I don't think that for 1 minute. So then at 10 PM on the Saturday, we were sticking with North America. This will be the losers bracket semi-final. So this will be the winner of the Atlanta Reign versus the Florida Mayhem, taking on the winner of the Washington Justice versus the Los Angeles Valiant. Now, I think it is a pretty interesting prospect that we might see the Florida Mayhem take on the Washington Justice. Now remember, those were the bottom two teams last season, and now they are competing in a match that is literally 2 steps away from grand finals. So very, very interesting how times can change, isn't it? I'm not going to go out with predictions for this. I've said Florida Mayhem and Washington Justice would be there based on my predictions, and then it gets really tough to predict it from there. I would say that the Florida Mayhem would be able to adapt well enough to see past the Washington Justice, but again, I think it would be a close 3-2 or something like that. So that's what I want to say about that. Then we move on to the Sunday. There'll be 2 games on the Sunday. One in the morning. This is at 10 AM. This will be the losers bracket final in APAC. So this will be the winner of the New York Excelsior versus the Guangzhou Charge versus the loser of the Seoul Dynasty versus the Shanghai Dragons. And to be quite honest, I'm quite happily going to try and predict this because I think whoever goes down, Seoul or Shanghai, are a better team than what will come through from New York or Guangzhou. If it is New York, I think it will be closer. And I think New York, if it's against Seoul, I think New York could win it if they play to their very, very, very best. But I also don't see that as like a majority percentage chance. I see that as a minority percentage chance. I think the biggest chance is that we see one of Seoul or Shanghai. I think Seoul, and then Seoul will end up winning that losers bracket final. And it will be Seoul and Shanghai that go through to the grand finals from APAC. That is my firm belief right now. But as these players have told us so far, don't necessarily believe what the form tables and what the paper tells you, because sometimes it can be very interesting. Then we have at 8 PM on the Sunday the second losers bracket final. This will be obviously the North American losers bracket final. So this will be whatever comes out of that 10 PM game on the Saturday between Reign or Mayhem and Justice or Valiant. And then the loser of the Shock versus the Fusion. So I think this goes one of 2 ways. If the Fusion find themselves in that losers bracket final, I think the Fusion will win it, and I think the Fusion will win it quite easily. If the Shock find themselves in that losers bracket final, I think the Shock might struggle depending on their opponent. Now, I don't know who their opponent will be. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. But if it's someone like the Reign or the Valiant, I think the Shock will go through quite easily. If it's the Mayhem or the Justice, I think there is a banana skin there for the Shock. And I have had a firm belief this entire season that the Shock are not going to retain their crown. They could still go to grand finals and try and defend it, but I still don't believe that they are a team that is good enough to defend it right now. So yeah, it's very, very difficult, but I would not be surprised to see a bracket where Shock have lost in that losers bracket final. I would not be surprised. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. It's going to be super interesting though. We're still in this meta quite obviously with the Roadhog buffs that have now been that are now being changed on experimental on live. It's going to be super interesting. Will the Washington Justice keep their crazy form going? Will they be able to eke it out against teams that become much, much tougher as they go down the line? And then that cracker of a match between Seoul and Shanghai is going to be absolutely amazing to watch, and I can't wait. But I'm going to leave it here for this one. So thank you guys so much for this video. If you'd like to give a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video. See you then.